All right, I'm going to make a video about something a little bit different today. On this nice snowy December day, I'm going to make a video about the narcissistic family dynamic and healing. And I'm going to focus on the kind of family that has a narcissist. A lot of you might have heard of the concept of narcissist. You might have heard that before. It's making the rounds and has been for some time in self-help circles, spirituality, psychology. And so, we're really dealing with someone who has a lot of grandiosity most of the time, who always needs to manage other people's perceptions, other people's realities, who likes to suck the energy out of the room, out of those around them in order to kind of appease their very wounded inner child. And the list goes on. But I want to focus on that kind of a family dynamic, and I'll be talking about it from the perspective of a two-parent family. For other kinds of family structures, it might function a little bit differently, but that's what I'm familiar with. And, you have basically one narcissistic parent, and then you have what's called a codependent parent. And so this is a parent whose life pretty much revolves around fulfilling the emotional needs and psychological needs and physical needs of the narcissist. So one parent is, this makes it very simple, but you could just think of it. One parent is taking, the narcissistic parent. One parent is giving. That's the codependent parent. If you're from this kind of a family dynamic, you will already know exactly what I'm talking about. Of course, you can have variations on this. At times, it can seem like both parents are narcissistic. At times, it can seem like the narcissistic parent is actually quite vulnerable, is actually quite generous. So don't necessarily put it in a box and make it all static, because, again, the situation can change. And you can see peaks and valleys. If you look back at your childhood experience, you might see peaks and valleys where it seems like the pattern doesn't really fit. But at the end of the day, part of the healing process is an acceptance of the family that you came from. So let's look at this. And I want to talk about this from the lens of a metaphor, really. A metaphor that occurred to me, that it really has to do with what happens to the codependent parent and the posture that the codependent parent is in. Okay? The codependent parent is in this posture with regard to the narcissistic parent, but also really in regard to life and reality, especially if this is a partnership or a marriage that's been lasting for a long time, like years, and your kids in this household. You will oftentimes observe on an energy level that there's something going on here that's not quite right. And so the metaphor that I have is being on a watchtower on, like old-fashioned city walls or a gate or a castle or something like that, and looking out from this watchtower, and, there might be different guards here and there who are manning the gates or who are manning the walls, whose job it is to keep everything safe. And of course, in a family, the job of the parents is fundamentally, first and foremost, to keep the kids safe. That's really what it's all about. And that's what the kids expect on like a biological level. Mommy and daddy are here to keep me safe. And what happens? As a kid, it's like you're sitting on this tower wall. You're sitting in this, watchtower. And then you see the codependent parent is out there a little bit in front of you at the edge of the wall. And let's say it's nighttime and everything's dark and you really can't see what's going on. And you see the codependent parent as sort of a guard all of a sudden get in a ready posture. Maybe they draw their sword. Maybe they take out their gun out of the holster. They take out their gun or their rifle. They draw their sword. Maybe they grab a flashlight and they're shining the light and they're saying, who goes there? If this is like Hamlet or something super, to fill out this metaphor that we're dealing with an old-fashioned castle or something. But it's this posture of there's danger. There's something out there. I don't know what it is. And that's the posture of the codependent person in this parenting situation. They're always defending themselves. They're always in a defensive posture. And so, now that I've sort of given you an outline for how to think of this metaphor, you might be thinking, well, wait a sec. If your premise is that we don't know what the danger is, that's not really true, right? Because in the narcissistic parenting dynamic with a narcissistic parent and a codependent parent, or as I've heard it called, a parent who's narcissistic, and then a parent who has self-love deficit syndrome, meaning that there's a problem with self-love, but it's sort of all tending towards the same thing. The word, what we're using the word codependent for here. You might think, well, wait a sec, this is perfectly well defined. We know exactly what the danger is. And the danger is the narcissistic parent. But is it that simple? Like I was saying before, aren't there times when we don't really know as kids why our codependent parent is all of a sudden getting defensive? Did the narcissistic parent say something? Sometimes the narcissistic parent makes a comment, says something rude, gets aggressive, is conflict seeking, and then we can sort of point to that, Other times, though, we don't know what's going on behind the scenes as kids. We don't know all of what's going on in their marriage, and as adults, we probably will never know everything that was going on in their marriage. So all we really have are little bits and pieces of this marriage or of this partnership between them. And the best we can really do is kind of guess at it. And really what ends up happening is we soak up emotionally what's going on with them. And what we end up soaking up is from the codependent parent, this sense that there's danger in the house. There's two ways that this can really go, I should briefly say, because another way is if you don't model primarily on the codependent parents, you would be modeling on the narcissistic parent. And kids who grow up who end up modeling on the narcissistic parents will generally end up being narcissistic. But probably you're not watching this video if that's the case. So most likely that, if you've grown up in this situation, you modeled on the codependent side of things, which means you view life as a sense of threat, as a sense of conflict, as a sense of needing to be defensive, needing to be guarded. There's something scary and I don't know what, okay? Again, maybe I heard dad say something. Maybe dad came home drunk. Maybe dad was using again or was an addict. Maybe dad was getting violent again. Maybe he was getting really abusive, assuming in this case, dad being the narcissistic parent. And then if it was the other way, let's say, it's mom, maybe mom was getting abusive. Maybe mom was getting really nasty and mean. Maybe mom was being withholding of something. Maybe mom was getting dismissive or putting her emotional needs first and stepping roughshod over everyone else. However it is. Again, you might see the narcissistic parent behaving in this really unfair, unbecoming way where they're not an adult anymore, but they're basically just a kid throwing a tantrum. Maybe you had a chance to see that. And so you could kind of put two and two together. But the point is, for a variety of reasons, as kids, we can't go there. And I said one reason is that we just don't have the information as children. We just can't see the big picture. We can't see their full partnership or marriage. Another reason, though, is deeper, which is we can't go to that place. It's very, very hard for kids to go to the place of saying one of my parents is the safe parent and one of my parents is fully the dangerous parent. As we get older, if we see patterns of abuse that really perpetuate and get really nasty and out of control, then we might get to the point where we have to really kind of grieve that, even as children, which is super difficult to say, I have one parent who's super dangerous, who's super risky, who's doing horrible things, who is so abusive. And the other parent is like a victim. And kids grow up where they will have the abusive parents and the victim parent. But what also happens very often is that you don't actually get that much of a clear picture where you can kind of sense that one parent is abusive and the other parent seems like they're more of a victim. And you might be able to kind of call that out. But again, even in the case where it's very obvious and you're calling it out, when you're 10 years old, you're saying, mom's this horrible abusive person, dad is really sweet, mom is horrible to dad. If you have a mother narcissist and a dad codependent, you might get to the point where you're saying that. But what I'm saying is on this really deep emotional level, have you really processed that? Have you really processed the fact that you had one parent who was not there for you, who was not available, who was not emotionally supportive? If they seemed to be those things, they were basically faking it. They were basically acting. They were basically slipping into that mold for a short period of time simply because their emotional profile gave them a couple of hours on a Wednesday night where they happened to be in a good mood because something good happened at work. maybe their sports team won, and so they were cheering after the game, so they're in a good mood. And then for like 2 hours, they're a really supportive parent. Okay, that's not what this is all about. It's not a pick and choose. It's not I'm supportive when I have a good mood, and then I'm an asshole the rest of the time. That's not solid parenting. And so what happens very often is you might think you can identify a pattern that's destructive, toxic, and abusive when you're a kid. But this is sort of the point here. Have you really assimilated that truth? Have you grieved the fact that you didn't have a supportive parent, that your parent couldn't be there for you, that your parent was too stuck in their emotional trap of their own wounded inner child, of their own dysregulation? And the list goes on. Probably not. Probably not. You probably couldn't process that. You probably couldn't feel and see that. You probably didn't have it clearly pointed out to you in a way that could really reach you emotionally. So at the end of the day, what do we really have here? If you're talking about kids growing up in this kind of a household, basically you have kids growing up in a situation where they know that there's conflict and they know that there's danger, but because of the weird rhythms of the two parents, of the narcissistic parents and the codependent parent, they have a good day, they have a bad day, they're fighting and arguing, it's physical, it's whatever, there's substances, whatever it might be. And then things seem kind of okay for a day or a week or a month even. And then we're back on track. And then weird stuff, whatever that rhythm is there really a time where things feel solid and you feel like you have the tools as a child to be confident, to have solid self-esteem? And when you step out of that house, do you have the tools to go to school and go to sports practice and grow up as an individual, doing whatever it is that you do, where you know how to relate to other people in a way that gives you boundaries, that gives you a sense of I am, that gives you a sense of I feel this and it's okay for me to feel this. I get to feel it just because I do feel it. I have permission to feel it because I exist, because I'm a human being. Do you get to have all those tools at your disposal? Or are those tools missing? Do you have a couple of them and the rest are gone? Do you have any of them? When you grow up, do you have those tools, And this is what a lot of us who are from these situations realize. It kind of hits us at a certain point. We go from thinking, I guess there's something kind of wrong with my family, with me, but I don't really know what it is because my childhood was okay. Or you might be thinking my childhood was really screwed up, but still, I was a big problem in my house as well. Or there's all kinds of stories and excuses that we go through when we're looking at this. And I'm not going to try to go through all of them now. We have so many narratives when we're still deep in, let's say, blue pills, when we still haven't woken up from the reality of our childhoods. Such a huge process, and there's so many levels that we have to go through on this journey, no matter what age we are. And we'll have reasons or excuses or justifications why things happen the way they did. And then you get to a place finally where you have to realize that you didn't have those tools to leave the family unit and to thrive, to be empowered, to feel that you have the boundaries you need, to feel that you're justified in feeling whatever it is that you feel, to feel like it's okay to say, yeah, you know what, I don't really like this dish. Sorry, but I don't think I'm going to eat this. I don't like this drink. I don't like the taste. No, thanks. I don't want to come over on Friday. I'm just not really in the mood. There's other stuff I'd rather do, and those are little examples, but everything in life, any kind of relationship, any kind of small potential for conflict. How do you do in those situations? How do you do when the specter of conflict presents itself? Even if it's like 3 steps away, even if it's like, I might have to stand up for myself with regard to this ski trip, because it's snowing right now, with a ski trip or a surfing trip or whatever. I might have to stand up for myself about that, about wanting to go or not wanting to go, or which hotel room I'm going to have, or what kind of, what I want to do for breakfast the day I wake up and go skiing. And you might be worried about the potential conflict from thinking about breakfast when you wake up on the day of a ski trip and you haven't even booked the tickets for the ski trip and you don't even know if it's going to be good snow or good weather for that week. This is what I'm saying, like multiple steps ahead of time, you're already worried about that conflict. And of course, you could be someone who blows up with conflict and you can't handle it and you freak out on people. You could just avoid conflict and be a people pleaser. And again, this is a theme with many variations, but really what we're coming down to is, how are your boundaries? How are your tools? How is your empowerment? Do you let yourself feel what you're feeling? Do you give yourself that permission? Do you know how to communicate it without it becoming a gigantic emotional bundle that's taking in so much over a seemingly small, trifling event, right? And so let's go back. Let's go back to this idea and round this all out of someone on the gates watching the guard, the watchman on the watchtower, the guard on the watchtower of the codependent parent, who the codependent parent, having been trained, or you can even use the really yucky word groomed by that narcissistic parent to be defensive, to need to look out for themselves, to need to please them in ridiculous ways, trying to please them and never succeeding, arguing with them, begging them to change their behavior. The narcissist doesn't change, and the codependent forgets about it. The codependent forgets about the fact that the narcissist doesn't really change. And then a week later, they have the same argument again. A week later, they have the same argument again. This is what's super common in these families, okay? You see all this. You see the codependent parent going through periods where they seem like they're in a better mood and everything's okay, and they've found a way to handle the family. They've found a way to handle their spouse, their partner. And then everything goes down the toilet again. And it's like, is every good time, is every good mood just setting up for a crash? Think about that. That's, again, going into the sense of danger, of needing to be on guard. Maybe it seems like with regard to the kids, sometimes you see the codependent parent really being there for the kids and stepping up. And other times it seems like the codependent parent just kind of disappears and is like, bye, I can't handle you emotionally. And it seems like it might happen over nothing at all. Maybe the kids want pasta one night and they just ask mom if they can do pasta for dinner. And then all of a sudden the mom's like, I'm done. See you tomorrow. And she's in her room, the door's shut. Right? You never know. And then the next day, the codependent parent, is great again and everything's okay. These are all things that might have happened to you. And when you grow up in this kind of a situation, as a kid, what are you soaking up? What are you watching? What are you observing? What behavior is getting modeled to you? I think the behavior that's getting modeled to you is one of needing to be on guard all the time. So you're sitting there on the wall, on the watchtower. Maybe you can go into Game of Thrones for this, and you see the next guard in front of you. All of a sudden they pull the flashlight out and they're shining a light everywhere, looking for something. They pull out the gun, they pull out the knife, they pull out the sword. They're looking for that danger, ready to snipe something from the rooftop. What are they going to shoot? Who's causing the problem in the family? Who's the danger? And this is where you really open the can of worms. And so this would be a good question. You can think about it from the perspective of the family, from the perspective of that codependent parent. What's the danger? And you want to say right away, it's the narcissistic parent. They're the danger. They're the danger. But what is it about the narcissistic parent that's so dangerous? Is it a situation where the narcissistic parent just gets labeled as evil? How can you accept that mom or dad is evil as a kid, right? So it can't be that. It has to be, for some reason, the narcissistic parent just sometimes gets to be abusive, just sometimes says mean things that are horrible and horrific, but only sometimes. Maybe it's that your two parents are always putting on a show and the codependent parent never wants to make it seem like the narcissistic parent is really a problem. Maybe they cover for them and they say, oh, no, it wasn't your daddy. It was me. And maybe the codependent parent is always going to that place. Now you're super confused. Is the problem the codependent parent? Is it the narcissistic parent? Is it both? Is it neither? And so it feels like there's this cloud just hanging over the family where sometimes it's very hard to identify just objectively what is the threat. And even if you can objectify it physically, if you can see it and point to it and tell somebody about it, maybe, can you emotionally deal with that fact, right? So at the end of the day, you can't accept as a kid what that danger might be, what it might look like. You can't really accept what it might be like to have nobody there for you emotionally. There's a big show and a big parade that you have one or both parents there emotionally for you. But a narcissistic parent can't really look after anyone else at the end of the day. That's one of the really hard truths to accept. And the codependent parent can't either. And that's an even harder truth to accept because their emotional energy is sapped by that partner. Okay, so who's the danger now? You see them on the tower with the flashlight, with the gun. They're looking through the scope on that sniper rifle. They're ready to go. Who is there? They don't really take aim on anything. They're just looking around. They don't fire. They haven't zeroed in on a threat. They just know there is a threat. They're acting like there's a threat. Their body's changing as they get into that posture. And you're watching them and you're saying, well, I'm just a little kid. I don't know how to defend a castle. I don't know how to be a guard on this tower. So I guess I just have to pay attention to these other guards here who are experienced and who know how to protect castle walls, right? So I'll just follow their lead. Because if they notice that there's a threat here, there's got to be a threat. This is what they do. They're big, they're strong. So you see your fellow guard, your little kid, you see the guard up there. He pulls out his gun, he pulls out his knife, he pulls out his light. Maybe you could say another way on this metaphor, he pulls out his walkie-talkie. The codependent parent is on the walkie-talkie. He's going to call for help. Alpha Omega 3, we got trouble down here on the east side of the wall. Maybe you hear, for that analogy, you hear the codependent parent on the phone with their sibling, with their therapist, with a friend, with a parent, complaining about, oh my God, so-and-so is like this, my partner's like this, my husband's like this, my wife's like that, complaining about the relationship and how horrible it is. And as a kid, you hear that and you're like, oh, there's a real threat. And again, it can also be so much more vague than that, where you hear them on the phone and they just sound tense. See, here's the multiple levels. It can look like they're pointing at the narcissist and saying, you're the problem in the family. But it can also look like the codependent parent isn't pointing at anyone. It's just their body language and their tone of voice that are saying, Houston, we got a problem. We're in danger. They can be on the phone with, if it's your mom who's a codependent, she can be on the phone with her best friend. And they're talking about playing tennis. And they're in a great mood. Your mom is laughing. She's just having a basic phone conversation about going to play tennis. And then all of a sudden, though, just from her tone of voice, from a word she uses, from how she looks when she's on the phone, as a kid, you absorb this. And some part of your subconscious says, yeah, but mom's acting like there's a threat here. Mom's acting like something's dangerous. Mom's acting like things aren't okay. But aren't they just going to go play tennis? And isn't this her best friend? Like, what could the issue be? And you don't know that she just had a fight with your dad. You don't know that she was just going through some old pictures or some old text messages that have to do with the marriage. Or you don't know that nothing bad even happened in the marriage. But because she's stuck in this narcissistic relationship, she's going to be stressed as almost a fact of life, as hard as that is to accept. Whatever the case may be, even the most simple, banal things can be instances where the codependent parent is in a defensive, threatened posture, that there's something really not okay. But who's going to acknowledge that in the family? Who's going to sit you down and tell you why? Who's going to roll into the house when you're 8 years old with a PowerPoint presentation and say, here's how your family works. This is why mom or dad always seems like there's a gigantic threat in the house. Here's why they're acting this way. Here's their brain chemistry. Here's their nervous system. Here's the energy dynamic. Here's the energy vampirism. Here's the entities, not even getting into all that, right? Here's the entities that might be attached to members of the family, right? Here's the attachments. My God, like who's going to sit you down and give you a PowerPoint and explain all this when you're 8 years old, 10 years old, whatever? It's just not going to happen. And if they did, how could you process that as a kid? This is what we're talking about. So this is all really, really important stuff to start going through and thinking about if you're on this process of looking at your family, looking at your so-called family of origin that you grew up with, what it was like, How did you cope with that? And what were you trained to do, right? Because if you're working on a watchtower, you're a guard in training. You're in training. And what kind of guard are you going to become when all the other guards that you see are acting like, or we're focusing on the one guard in front of you, who's your parent? What are you going to do when they act like there's a threat? And for those of you who really want to go deep and keep digging and digging, the fact of the matter is I'm focusing on the codependent here in this kind of relationship. But the narcissistic parent is also acting like everything's a threat. That makes it even more confusing because the narcissistic parent has a posture that says that everything's a threat too. That's why they always sucking energy, why they deep down always feel unsafe, that they have to manage every situation. They always need that control because they feel unsafe too. That's even another one to look at. And you can apply a lot of the ways of thinking that I was applying here with regard to looking at the codependent parent. And if you've been doing research into narcissism, you can totally construct a metaphor based on modeling your behavior on the narcissist. I mentioned earlier that those who really do that might end up growing up to be narcissistic themselves if they're really modeling their behavior on that parent. But if you're just talking about the energy dynamic of the family, absolutely. This is just more fuel to the fire. And when you have both parents who are essentially operating from a sense of conflict, a danger, and threat, it's really a sense that life is dangerous, life is threatening. You're probably going to tap into that a little more from the codependent parent if you view that parent as safe. And so as you're sort of looking to the codependent parent for a sense of safety and a sense of reality checking, like if dad's the narcissist, you go to the mom and you say, well, Mom, is everything okay? Mom, what's going on? You feel okay? Why did dad say that? Why is dad behaving like that? So you might go to that parent viewing your codependent parent as safer. And therefore you might model a little bit more based on the codependent parent. However, this is sort of the extra layer I'm adding now. The whole family, both parents, are in a state of threat. Life is scary. Life is threatening. The world is threatening. We're always fighting to survive. We're always fighting to keep our head above water. And so you are sitting there watching the guard on that wall, seeing, well, how does a guard behave? Well, a guard behaves like there's danger all the time. What's the danger, though? Nobody knows. Nobody can fully give you that assessment that you can integrate as a kid. It's just not going to happen. Okay? So that's something about this metaphor. I really hope that this brought you into something. More further research, more further ideas. You can also go into this as far as what does it do to your body and your nervous system and your threat response and your traumatic response, your response to trauma. I've been reading from Peter Levine, who is one of the biggest trauma researchers and investigated ways to help trauma survivors, a whole variety of traumas. It's such a broad category. And he has these concepts of the fight or flight response, which everybody has heard of. But the idea that the fight or flight response doesn't get to complete. When the fight or flight response doesn't complete properly, you get stuck in limbo, right? So what does that look like in the Watchtower? You see the guard in front of you drawing the weapon and then putting it back, drawing the weapon and then putting it back. We don't know what the threat is. Nobody can identify it, right? And so it's just the state of being threatened in the family. Well, essentially, what does threat look like in the body? Quickened heart rate, different kind of breathing,